My name is Christina Dillabo, and I'm the Director of Communications for the Desert Southwest Conference. I'm also a member of Scottsdale United Methodist Church. During the 2015 session of our annual conference, a resolution was overwhelmingly passed, asking every congregation in our conference to use study materials produced by the Conference Board of Church and Society for a congregation-wide study and reflection of the nature, extent, and effects of economic inequality. The results of the study will be discussed at the 2016 session of the Desert Southwest Annual Conference and create strategies for our congregations and the communities they serve to address the issues of economic inequality and petition the 2016 General Conference of the United Methodist Church. The video you're watching now is the introduction to the study course produced by the Economic Inequality Subgroup. During this course, we'll be addressing 3 questions. What is the situation? What is happening? Why should we care? And what should the church do about it? Achieving a consensus on politics, policies, or economics is not the goal of this material. The goal is that all of our congregations will engage in faithful visioning and seeking of economic justice in our faith communities and in the broader economic and political world. Thank you for your participation in addressing this difficult issue. Now let's get started.
Hello, I'm Dan Sagramoso. I'm a member of Paradise Valley United Methodist Church in Paradise Valley, Arizona. You've just heard an introduction to the issue of economic inequality, which is one of the most important and contentious of our time. In the remaining time we have in this session, we'll explore the question, what is the situation? What's happening? The short answer is that for the past 3 decades, there has been remarkable growth in income and wealth at the top 1% of U.S. society, while poverty has increased at the bottom and the middle class has stagnated. The U.S. by far has the most unequal distribution of income in all developed nations. The U.S. ranks 64th in the world in income equality. That's right, there are 63 nations with less income inequality than we have. An even more startling statistic is that the world's richest 85 individuals have as much wealth as the poorest half of the world's population combined. In the U.S., the 400 richest people have more wealth than the bottom 150 million Americans put together. Let's clarify the difference between wealth and income. Wealth is the value of what one owns, like savings, property, and investments. Income is what one earns, like salary, bonuses, interest, and dividends. Generally, inequality is the distribution of wealth is even more pronounced than inequality in the distribution of income. There is no official definition of the middle class, but you can say that the median salary in the U.S. is around $50,000. 50% above and 50% below the median income can be thought of as the middle class. In 2012, the bottom rung of the income level for the top 1% was $380,000. The 1% goes up from there, with entrepreneurs at around 3 million, CEOs, financial sector, star actors, and athletes at $10 million plus. In 2009, during the recent recession, top hedge fund managers each earn more than $1 billion. On average, the top hedge fund managers earn over 22,000 times the pay of the average worker. Yet, thanks to a tax loophole, they pay lower rates of income and payroll taxes than what average workers must pay. How has income distribution changed over time? Adjusted for inflation, the typical male worker earned, in rounded numbers, $48,000 in 1978 and $34,000 in 2010. The typical person in the top 1% earned $394,000 and $1.1 million in those same years. Recent research has shown us the bigger picture. This shows the top 1% share from 1920 to 2010. It looked like a suspension bridge. We can see on this graph that the two peak years of income inequality were 1928 and 2007. In both those years, the top 1% took home over 23% of all income. Notice that the 1%'s share dropped to 9% in 1970. In the 1970s, the average CEO earned just under 50 times more than their average employee. By the 2000s, the average CEO pay had grown to 350 times more than their average employee. What happened after 1928? In 1929, the market crashed, leading to the Great Depression. What happened in 2007? Another crash, leading to the Great Recession. Consumer spending accounts for 70% of the U.S. economy. The bulk of that spending is done by the middle class. Rich people, proportional to their incomes, spend less on goods and services than middle class and poor people. A rich man who earns 1,000 times as much as a typical American can buy only so many haircuts and pairs of jeans and dinners out. If the rich man had less money and 1,000 middle-class people had more, they would each buy haircuts, and the barber would have many more customers and would purchase more products from suppliers, leading to hiring additional staff to meet the demand. Very rich people can't spend enough to drive a consumer economy. For 3 decades after World War II, the economy boomed and income inequality was low. We had what could be called a virtuous cycle. The economy expands, production grows, wages increase, workers buy more, companies hire more, tax revenues increase, government invests more, education of workers increases, and this cycle continues as the economy expands more. The average hourly earnings of production workers rose until the median wage started to decline in 1978, while many people were doing extremely well. Employers worked harder to dismantle existing labor unions and to keep new ones from forming. Government regulation of markets eased. Lower transportation costs enabled production to be parceled out all over the world. Globalization didn't reduce the number of U.S. jobs, but wages declined. The Dow rose dramatically in early 1990. Investors made lots of money. The government deregulated Wall Street, and financiers were the fastest growing part of the economy. But how were middle class and poorer families affected when wages declined? More women joined the workforce to help make up the difference in family income. Both men and women worked longer hours with second jobs and overtime. Borrowing increased. Homes were used as ATMs. Credit card debt grew. The virtuous cycle turned into a vicious cycle. Companies downsize. Tax revenues decrease. Government cuts programs. Education of workers decreases. Unemployment rises. Deficits grow. Wages stagnate. Workers buy less. And the cycle continues as companies downsize more. Throughout history, government policies have always been heavily influenced by big money donors, to candidates and elected officials. But the amount of such contributions has skyrocketed in proportion to the increase in wealth of individuals and corporations. Those contributions in the 2014 elections totaled more than $3.6 billion. Regardless of which party is in office, politicians vote the interest of their donors. The interest at the top of the income distribution will prevail. The following perspectives are drawn from Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz's book, The Price of Inequality, and Matthew Sherman's paper, A Short History of Financial Deregulation in the United States. Markets are not free. They are not only shaped by government, they are also shaped by dominant economic interests, typically in ways that benefit those at the top. In the myth of trickle-down economics, when money is given to the wealthy, they create more jobs. However, statistical evidence does not bear that out. Moreover, when wealth is used on political lobbying and manipulation of regulatory agencies, monopolistic advantages are gained in the market, and competitors are left at a disadvantage. When did we go astray? Government regulation of aspects of the economy has been with us since the nation's founding, and it increased in response to several financial collapses between the 1880s and 1930s. In 1976, 77, and 1980, there was substantial deregulation of the transportation industry, and in 1980, President Carter signed legislation which phased out interest rate ceilings and blurred the lines between banks and thrift institutions. Some of you may remember the savings and loan crises in the mid-1980s. Deregulation of the financial sector continued under Presidents Reagan, Clinton, and both Bush administrations. Just before the 2008 crisis, 40% of all corporate profits went to the financial sector, compared to 20% in the early 1970s. The tax system was also made less progressive. Under Reagan, the top tax rate was lowered from 70% to 28%. Under Clinton, it was raised to 39.9%, and under George W. Bush, it was lowered to 35%. Capital gains, more than half of which are earned by the top 0.1%, were lowered further under Clinton to 20%, and then under George W. Bush to 15%. By 2007, the top 400 earners in the U.S. paid an average income tax rate of just 16.6%, considerably lower than the rate for the vast majority of taxpayers. As Stiglitz put it, unemployment, the ability of the market to generate jobs for so many citizens, is the worst failure of the market, the greatest source of inefficiency, and a major cause of inequality. I would be remiss in talking about what's happening without discussing the United Methodist Church's involvement with the issue of economic inequality. While the UMC has a history in social justice and many current activities that include the issue of poverty, it appears that our denomination is lagging in dealing with economic inequality. For example, some church members still feel strongly that the church should not be involved in issues which they interpret as being political, even though those issues pertain to the most fundamental of our social and theological principles. Even the most active local churches and the conference itself spend far less money and attention on social justice, which deals with problems by working towards systemic change, as opposed to missions, which deal with emergency help for people in trouble. needs which, by and large, are the result of flawed systems. I may be missing something, but I see very little about economic inequality in Methodist publications and hear very little about it in Methodist conversations. Yet think about how hungry our world has been to hear the Pope address inequality issues. Other Protestant denominations, such as the Lutherans and the United Church of Christ, have also been far more vocal on this issue than have we United Methodists. It may be that we have lost our sense of mission in biblical instructions about furthering the kingdom of God on earth, and even what that mission would entail. We will hear more about all this in later sessions as we discuss why should we care, and what should the church, what should we do about it.
My name is Paul Self-Price. I'm the minister of Mission Bell United Methodist Church in Phoenix, Arizona. I've been asked to speak to the relationship between economic inequality and politics. We live in a time when the vast majority of this country's wealth is concentrated in the top 0.01% of the population, who use it to influence the outcome of elections primarily for their own benefit. Self-interest is not new, nor is it limited solely to the wealthy elite, but it is the wealthy elite who have the wherewithal to influence the actions and policies of our government. We see this more clearly during this election cycle, in which most candidates have a billionaire backing them. The Koch brothers auditioned 5 presidential hopefuls a few months back, including Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, and Scott Walker. There are others less well-known but equally well-heeled, like Sheldon Adelson. Democrats have their special donors as well, like George Soros and Warren Buffett and Bill Maher. Where does that leave the rest of the country, whose population grows poorer as a result? Unable to affect change, powerless to have an impact on decision-making, at least when compared to those who have wealth, power, and the ability to use it effectively in a political arena, they are minimalized as an electorate. It is the power elite who choose who runs and who doesn't, and those they choose to run will do their major donors' bidding when called upon to do so, or else, and they do. Mr. Smith hasn't been in Washington for a long time. An example of this recently came to light in the state of Missouri. Tom Schweik was a Republican candidate for governor who publicly attacked what he thought was corruption in state government. A whisper campaign was started by John Hancock, who was the chairman of the Republican Party in Missouri. He started the rumor that Schweik was Jewish, which was false. Within a month of that, Schweik committed suicide. His campaign manager, Spence Jackson, publicly called for the resignation of John Hancock, and within a month of doing so, Jackson also committed suicide. John Danforth, former Republican senator from Missouri turned Anglican priest, says Missouri politics has devolved into an arena where ruthless operatives, financed by a wealthy few, battle for power. He hopes the suicides will leave voters there to re-examine the political landscape. What is at stake when capital is concentrated in the hands of the relative few is democracy itself. Another form of government evolves from it that the majority did not choose nor want. It is a form of oligarchy, the kind our founding fathers fought against to create this country. All the while, as wages stagnate or drop, hope of a better tomorrow for millions of people goes with them. And when hope dies, it is replaced with despair, which becomes the milieu for addiction and crime. Our nation's cities bear witness to this. People are disenfranchised from the political system over which they feel they exert no influence. They zone out, or worse, where political dialogue is concerned, become uninformed about candidates and issues, and those who continue to vote become fodder for radio talk show hosts as well as cable news networks. In the words of a political philosopher writing over 30 years ago, citizens without money come to share a profound conviction that politics offers them no hope at all. This is a kind of practical knowledge that they learn from experience and pass on to their children. With it comes passivity, deference, and resentment. More recently, Pope Francis addressed the issue of how inequality and insecurity affects the manner in which we relate to one another. Masses of people find themselves excluded and marginalized without work, without possibilities, without any means of escape. Human beings are themselves considered consumer goods to be used and then discarded. We have created a throwaway culture which is now spreading. It is no longer simply about exploitation and oppression, but something new. Exclusion ultimately has to do with what it means to be a part of the society in which we live. Those excluded are no longer society's underside or its fringes or its disenfranchised. They are no longer even a part of it. The excluded are not the exploited, but the outcast, the leftovers. It isn't difficult to know who has the power in this country, and it isn't the people. Of the people, by the people, and for the people has become a quaint sentiment that doesn't apply to the reality we currently face, where many people are considered disposable and expendable. Among them, there are many of our beloved veterans who return from wars in far-off places, maimed physically, mentally, and spiritually. But the homeless, the mentally ill, the lost and forsaken don't vote. Much has been said about the American dream, the notion that anyone can make it if they work long enough and hard enough. There is a downside to this in that most people in today's economic climate of low wages and limited working hours are only able to scrape by, working multiple jobs. The American dream eludes them as they sacrifice time with their families to pay rent and put food on their tables. A form of wage slavery exists today that hasn't been seen since the early days of the Industrial Revolution, when child labor was de rigueur. In the end, politics is a tool to effect change, to bring about what is good and good for all, or good for some at the expense of others. As the church, it is incumbent on us to use any tool available to us to benefit all of God's children, those we like, those we don't, those who look like us, those who don't, those who talk like us, and those who don't, those who think like us, and those who don't. God's politics are quite different from ours. God votes for all of us, and that includes all of creation. Maybe that should be our politics too. Thank you.